Hey, welcome back. So this section is all about, do a little drum roll, lists, which you probably could see anyways on the slide. Lists are something that I've mentioned a couple times, maybe 5 or 6 times in the course already. Basically in this way, I've said, all right, there's this thing called a list and you can loop through them, but we haven't talked about lists yet. So we'll get there eventually. And then we'll talk about looping. Or in the data types video, I talked about there's numbers, there's Booleans, and strings. There's this thing called lists. We'll come back to that later. Well, this is where we come back to it. So let's start with the simplest question. What is a list? So it's really just a collection or grouping of items. And those items can be anything in Python. It could be a string, it could be floats, integers, Boolean values. It could be other lists. When we talk about dictionaries, that's also an option. So it's a way of combining data into one variable, one structure. So this is the first of the data structures we'll be working with. And a data structure is sort of just like the next level, a higher level up of a data type, where it will actually store other data types inside of it in a structured way. So we'll come back to all of that. But let's start by actually walking through a hypothetical situation. Let's say I wanted to make an app that had a shopping cart or a shopping list feature. So a user could add items to a shopping cart, and we would keep track of those items. Very basic thing, but fundamental to any website, any e-commerce platform where you're buying things. So there's going to be a list behind the scenes used to store what your data is, what you're actually buying. In other languages, by the way, these are called arrays. Often in Python, they're called lists, but the idea is the same. It's a grouping of information, of items together with an order. So without lists, with what we know right now, we could store information, like let's say we're doing a shopping cart. We could do item 1 equals, bananas. And then another variable, item 2 equals, and we could have a Lego set or something. And we could keep going, but our code would only work as long as we had defined item 1 to item, however many variables the user was allowed to fill up. So we could have a while loop and ask them to input something, and then we'd store it in item 1, and then the next time through, we'd store their input in item 2, and the next time through in item 3. But that's clearly limited. One thing is that our data is all over the place. It's not associated at all. These have nothing to do with one another. And imagine if we had 100 items in our cart, that would be a nightmare as far as the code. And it also it's not a good solution. So what we could also do is store everything in a string potentially if we were working with strings. So we could have something like, let's say the first item added to our list here was printer paper. Okay. And then the next item that's added in is a microwave. So we could come up with some weird way, maybe like 3 slashes to denote a different piece of data. And then after microwave, we're buying, a towel or something like this. Then this is a way of storing data in a list, or it's not technically in a list. It's a way of storing data in a string, multiple pieces. But then there's problems with this because if we want to print them out separately, or if we want to do something, we have to split them up based off of these slashes. What if we want to reorder them? Maybe it's some sort of wish list for my birthday or a holiday. I want to have a priority, with the items. This is the thing I want the most at the top. So if I wanted to reorder this using code, it would be really, really difficult. So all of this is to say that a list it helps with all of these problems. A list allows us to have as many pieces of data as we want in one structure. We can reorder them. We can split it. We can add new items, delete items. It's basically like a little mini database stored inside of a single Python variable. So here's a simple example of something we could do with a list. So it's a simple while loop. It says, welcome to your shopping cart. Would you like to add something to the cart? Let's say I want to add in printer paper. And it keeps asking me, let's say this time I'm going to add applesauce. And after that, let's do a houseplant and protein powder and a zebra print rug, a faux zebra print rug. We don't want a real zebra. And that's good enough for us. So I can type Q, which is how this program is set up, where it will quit. And then all it does is it prints out to me your final grocery list. But notice the order is actually changed and it sorted things alphabetically. So we get applesauce, then houseplant, printer paper, then protein powder, and then zebra print rug. So very, very simple example. Obviously, this is not a website. This is not a real e-commerce platform. Nobody adds items to your cart like this in the terminal. But the idea is the same. I'm adding these items in one order, and they are coming out in a different order. But behind the scenes, they're all stored in the exact same list. So I could easily reverse the order with a single command, or I could split it in half. I could remove the two, let's say printer paper and protein powder. I could remove those easily. I could merge it with another list. There's so many things we can do. So the last thing for this video I'll discuss are our objectives. We have a lot to cover with lists. First, we want to be able to describe, create, and access a list data structure. So we've talked about what they are, but we haven't seen the syntax. We haven't seen how to access them or to create them. So that's next. Then we're going to use a lot of built-in methods to modify and copy lists. So we've seen things like print or random.randint. Well, lists have a ton of their own built-in methods that we can use to do all sorts of things. Sort, add new items, delete items, cut lists in half, all sorts of things. Then we're going to learn to iterate over lists using loops and something called list comprehensions. So I'll leave that one at that for now. And then finally, we'll work with nested lists to build more complex data structures. So I mentioned a list can store anything. It can store strings or booleans, ints, floats, whatever. It can also store other lists. And that's where we start to get into more complex data structures. So from here on out, a quick little roadmap. We're going to start basically going in this order. We'll start by talking about creating lists and accessing items. We'll have a couple of quizzes and exercises interspersed, but then following this section will be another section that consists solely of exercises. So coding exercises in the browser. We have a bunch of tests written where you'll get feedback and you'll be able to tell if you did something right or wrong. So that's coming up. Hopefully something to look forward to if you like those. All right, let's get started with lists.